Let's pick up where we left off on Tuesday, because as soon as it became abundantly clear that Rick Tocchet was going to be the coach of this team, people have gotten themselves worked into a frenzy. There have been countless examples. If you go on Twitter, if you go on Facebook, an incredible amount of people hate this hire, have hated the concept of this hire for well over a month. And I want to pull back the curtain a little bit. I want to take you back to the first time that I remember hearing Rick Tocchet's name being mentioned around the Flyers. This goes back to John Tortorella's employment, right? If you even go back a full year, right? Go back a full year to the Torts benching of Sean Couturier. At that point, there were names being bantied about. There was the idea that what if Torts doesn't finish out the season or doesn't finish out his contract, and instead he becomes kind of a lame duck for a year? Could the Flyers do that? Would they do that? Last year, Berube became available, and there was the thought that Berube had connections to this organization, had obviously been the head coach of this team before, kind of got a little bit of a raw deal, has gone on to coach in other places, won a cup, like a very good coach. He's up there in Toronto. Fair chance that they have a nice little run in them. And I hope they do, because I'll be in Toronto during when the Stanley Cup final would be happening. So that'd be kind of nice. I have not watched any playoffs for the last couple of days while I've been in Florida. So, we'll see. But last year, the thought was there was always the chance that Berube would end up back here with the Flyers. And it didn't happen. Large part of that was thought that maybe the amount of money that the Flyers were paying to Torts, they just couldn't justify going out and bringing another guy in to be the coach. Okay. So that was last year. This year, there had been conversations and there had been a growing belief that maybe Torts was going to go up into the front office as an advisor. And the name Mike Sullivan was floated. We knew about that. The name Rick Tocchet has been around. Now, it doesn't mean that the Flyers had some grand plan to oust Torts at the start of the 2024-2025 season and bring in Rick Tocchet, who's got a really strong connection to this organization and especially to Keith Jones. So I don't want that to get misconstrued. There wasn't some grand plan at the start of the year that, by the summer of 25, Rick Tocchet was going to be the coach. But I think they have always kind of had this idea that if things were to go sideways here, if things were to go sideways with Tocchet in Vancouver, that there could be some business to be done here and that he could end up here. Okay. A lot of people don't like the hire. Why don't a lot of people like the hire? Depending on how you and who you follow, there's a belief that Tocchet's system is boring. There is a belief out there that Tocchet's system is a dump and chase. I'm not here to break down the X's and O's of Tocchet's system. We'll get into that at some point later this week or early next week on Snow the Goalie, and I'll let Bundy run lead on it. There is a belief out there that this is a mistake of a hire because it just proves that the Flyers are the old boys club. It's in the minds of some fans, it is further proof that the new era of orange is the old era of orange, just with a new coat of paint. And so I did a little bit of thinking about this over the last week or so, because last week I was essentially told it's going to be Tocchet. There was a very brief window where there was a thought that he might have flirted with going back to TV. And you saw him end up on TNT's studio show. And then I think it was Friedman might have been the one who put it out. Friedman and Drager, I think, had different info going over the last week or so, but that he might want to go back to TV, which to me was a leverage play. We know that Boston was interested. We know that the Flyers were interested at some point. Pittsburgh was interested. Seattle was interested. It always felt like Tocchet was going to want to come back out east if he was going to be a coach. So I never thought that Seattle was a real option. He won 2 Stanley Cups as an assistant coach with Pittsburgh in 2016 and 2017. That was possible. Strong connection here, obviously. Boston, depending on how you believe they're going to be able to turn things around and how quickly, maybe that would have been an intriguing place. People don't like the hire. Now, there are some that do, but the vast majority of the Flyers fan base that I see on both Facebook and X hates the hire. Hated it conceptually, hated it as soon as his name started popping up around Torts' firing. There were people that when the report came out, he might have gone back to TV. There were people certainly doing, victory laps. When the idea came up of him maybe going to Boston or Pittsburgh or Seattle, people were excited. I don't hate this hire, but I don't love this hire. So allow me to just kind of unpack this really quickly. I'm going to get out to the comments. This is the first time in quite a long time where the Flyers have made a hire and I've been apathetic, which is not great. Admittedly, the goal here is to get Flyers fans excited about this new era of Orange, and it's supposed to kind of move the whole thing forward. And it doesn't mean that it's a bad choice. It doesn't mean that this whole thing is a waste, right? But this isn't the kind of hire that gets me, as somebody who's going to cover this team, it doesn't like get me jazzed up. Now, will Tocchet be a great source of quotes and short form content opportunities? 100%. Will Tocchet be a hell of an interview on Snow the Goalie? Indeed, he will. But is it the kind of hire that makes you go, all right, this is a transformative hire? No, I don't think so. Allow me to go back a little bit. So when I started working around covering the team in some capacity, it was the 2017-2018 season. Hackstall was here. And I think it was the first year that I was down covering the team with Anthony when we were doing like an early version of the Russ Joy Show. That was the year that Hextall got fired on the Black Friday game. We talked about Hextall maybe getting fired before Hackstall. So I've gotten to cover Hack. Scott Gordon came aboard. Gordon joined us over on Snow the Goalie. Fantastic interview. I liked Scott Gordon a lot. I thought that he did a great job of speaking to like the modern player. So I liked him. The Flyers brought in Alain Vigneault, who had never won a Stanley Cup, but had taken two different teams to a Stanley Cup final. And conceptually, I liked that hire. I felt like that was the kind of thing that maybe pushes this thing ahead. And while I didn't think that the team was going to light the world on fire, I liked it because it felt like a good proven track record. And it was a guy that I thought could maybe get a Flyer squad over the hump. Vigneault didn't work. Mike Gill was an interim coach. He wasn't very good at anything. Tortorella's hiring. On one hand, you go, that should be something that could take a mediocre squad and kind of get them up and over the bump. The problem, of course, is that in the timing of that hiring, Chuck Fletcher was here. He was trying to put some Band-Aids on things. You kind of knew that he was going to lose the power struggle ultimately to Torts, and he did. Tortorella cast a very big shadow. Some believed that he might have had more influence, or maybe had more influence than a head coach should have on the roster construction. You know, did he have more authority than Danny Briere? There were those kind of questions, those kind of narratives kind of permeated the last few years. And I said that once Torts got let go, this hire has to be one that is made between Danny Briere and Keith Jones. They have to put their stamp on it. And as the process kind of played out from Torts' firing through today, when it was officially announced that Rick Tocchet became the 25th head coach in the history of the Philadelphia Flyers, there weren't names that got you excited, right? Joel Quenneville is not a name that I think would have excited this fan base, and he went to Anaheim. Mike Sullivan is not a name that got me jazzed up. There were some people who liked the idea because he won cups with Pittsburgh, but he signed elsewhere. Pat Ferschweiler was a name that came out at one point, had just won a national championship, had previous experience as an AHL or as an assistant coach in the NHL. The name Jay McKee came out, but that was more of a maybe putting his name on the radar for other potential openings as maybe an assistant or something at the NHL level. You had Tocchet's name get floated out there. Jay Woodcroft's name was out there. There wasn't a name that came up that makes you go, that guy's perfect for the rebuild. That guy is the perfect player development coach. And that's the guy that's going to grow with this Matvei Michkov-led young core and push this thing forward for the next 7 or 8 years. That guy didn't exist. Some would have said that David Carl could have been that guy. He was never going to come here. I just don't think that it ever made sense. And I don't know when he's going to go to the pros. Eventually, you would assume that he will. But I don't think it's going to be anytime soon, and he signed an extension with Denver. So I guess all of this is to say I don't think there was a perfect candidate out there for the Flyers, which is kind of why I kept landing back on Brad Shaw was the right guy, right? Because you could hire him on a shorter-term deal. The annual money wouldn't have been exorbitant. And he's done a good enough job of developing players and building rapport with these players that I thought he made sense as a short-term hire. And maybe the team would prove that the little run that they went on at the end of last year wasn't a fluke, and that he can connect with this group of players in this locker room, which is a still relatively young team. Tocchet getting hired doesn't change any of that. And the one thing that I'll take as a big positive is the way that Quinn Hughes talked about Rick Tocchet. And that's the kind of thing that I do want to take a look at when I think about, like, all right, if there is a positive to come out of this, I look at Quinn Hughes' comments about Rick Tocchet. Because while I kind of threw out the joking idea of, like, oh, the best thing that could possibly happen to the Flyers is that Tocchet comes here and then Quinn Hughes is going to make his way over here. That wasn't going to happen, right? He's likely going to end up going to New Jersey if he eventually leaves Vancouver. But I had the quote here from Quinn. I just lost it. I'll bring it up. But he was pretty effusive in his praise of Rick Tocchet as a head coach. All right, here we go. So Quinn Hughes said back in April, he's an amazing coach. You look at me individually and my game, he's been amazing for me, amazing for a lot of guys. He's just a great person, first of all. That's a guy you want to compete for, you want to play for. He's a terrific coach. Last year, he won the Jack Adams Award, and this year, I think he's probably been even better. But whatever he does, it's his decision. Obviously, I'd like to think we have him back, and I think he knows that. So that's Quinn Hughes. That's arguably your most important player if you're a Canucks fan. Now, in fairness, it is very, very hard to envision a scenario where Quinn Hughes ends up here. But if you're thinking about the next stage and the next level of taking this rebuild to being something that does ultimately create sustainable winning, you're going to have to attract players. And so maybe, just maybe, part of the Tocchet hire here, right? Because if let's just assume that Danny Briere was in the same mentality that I was. There's not a transformational, generational coach available. If you're comparing Pat Ferschweiler, Brad Shaw, and Rick Tocchet, do players really know Pat Ferschweiler? Or are they going to be attracted to playing for him as free agents? Maybe not. Does Brad Shaw move the needle for free agents? Probably not. If Tocchet gives you an advantage, not in 2025, but with a 2026 free agent class, is that the kind of thing that gives you that little bit of an edge? You know that you're going to have a lot of cap flexibility coming up in the 2026 offseason. Is that the deciding factor that leads you to go out and get a Rick Tocchet? Now, mind you, I broke all this down on Tuesday. There was a horrific, toxic breakdown in that locker room in Vancouver last year with Elias Pettersson and JT Miller that led to JT Miller getting jettisoned into the sun, getting sent to New York. And, like, we have to at least acknowledge that some of the responsibility for not being able to smooth that over probably falls a lot on the locker room. It falls on leadership. But does it fall on the head coach? Part of it might. We don't know. It'll kind of be the responsibility of the assembled media at some point. It probably won't be at an introductory press conference, but at some point, it's going to be asked. It has to be asked. And it's not because you think that there are rifts in the Flyers locker room right now, and you don't want those to fester and become another Pettersson versus JT Miller situation. But, like, it's a fair question to have of the head coach. You know, there was this massive drop off in production from Pettersson last year, like enormous, right? Enormous decrease in point production. But I think it's a fair question. You know, what happened? What happened within that locker room, within that dressing room that led to those two players being at odds and Vancouver having to move off of one of them? What happened, right? And listen, he might not ultimately give you a straight answer, but I think from the Flyer fan perspective, you probably want to know that whatever was going on there preceded Tocchet and was something that, like, no one was going to be able to smooth over. And maybe just having that little bit of kernel of truth, that little nugget to kind of put in your head makes you feel a little bit better. Because ultimately what you don't want to have happen is you don't want there to be a potentially toxic situation here. Now, in fairness, this is a locker room that has largely been viewed as anti-ego, not a group of guys that have players with oversized egos that outweigh their production on the ice. So that's a positive. It seems to be a good group of guys. So that is a positive. Okay. But again, does Tocchet's hiring make me like jump out of my seat and feel like, oh yeah, this team is a cup contender in the next 2 years? No. More of what is going to happen here over the next 2 years comes down to asset management and comes down to free agency. If Danny Briere isn't able to woo a free agent in 2025 via restricted free agency or unrestricted free agency in 2026, if he can't get an impact player that way, if he can't parlay any of the first round picks this year into either draft capital for next year or a potential player that could actually help this team this year and beyond, then it's more of a failure on the front office. Right? I've been very clear about this. I think that Briere is going to get aggressive this offseason. I don't think it's going to be through free agency. I think he's going to get aggressive enough. He's going to address one of the holes in goal, probably bring in another steady defenseman, and hopefully bring in a steady center that can play like 2C minutes, right? But isn't an albatross of a contract like Kevin Hayes was when he was brought in, right? I think that Briere is going to do enough with this roster. And this Eastern Conference was such a fucking disaster last year that, like, it stands to reason the Flyers are going to compete for a playoff spot next year. And while there's a large group of people that want to see them tank for Gavin McKenna, it ain't happening. Now, if they have an unintentional tank season, if they overvalue the players they have and they are woefully off, like Chuck Fletcher was, especially in his last year, that's something entirely different. But if you're a Flyers fan right now and you're looking for some positivity, I will, I guess, hold on to the Quinn Hughes quotes, the knowledge and the belief across the league that Tocchet has forged some really strong relationships with players and that he could ultimately be somebody that can help bring a free agent to this city. Now, does that mean that in 2026 or whatever, you're going to be able to go out and get a Connor McDavid to come in because he respects Rick Tocchet? Probably not. Probably not. If you have the money to attract a player, great. Are the Flyers now going to have an edge if they wanted to go after Mitch Marner this offseason? I can't imagine that this really helps or hurts. I don't think it really changes anything. You still have to create the cap flexibility, and they don't have it. This could change the calculus if the Flyers were interested in Elias Pettersson around the trade deadline. If Pettersson and Tocchet have a bad relationship, it takes him off the table. If Pettersson and Tocchet have a strong relationship, it would almost kind of indicate that the seeds that might have been planted around the trade deadline between the Flyers and Vancouver and between Danny Briere and the GM in Vancouver, maybe that is a place that you pick up. And can Tocchet get the most out of Pettersson? Again, we have to know what led to the massive decline in his overall stats a season ago. Now, is Tocchet a great coach? I don't know. He won a Jack Adams Award 2 years ago. And then he oversaw a team that woefully underperformed this year and a team that had this awful incident. Okay. I don't know. So when I said to you guys before, like I'm apathetic about the hire, that's where I'm at. There are potential positives. And if ultimately he helps to recruit a legitimate free agent to this town, whether it's this year, maybe it's getting a guy who signs an offer sheet to fully buy into and believe in the vision here, great. If he's able to help you woo a free agent in 2026 and it's somebody who fundamentally changes the trajectory of this team, great. If that was a big part of the hire, awesome. So I do want to take you to some of the comments here, and I want to give you the comments that came out from the press release in case you missed it, because I think that Danny Briere, Keith Jones, and Dan Hilferty all kind of pointed in the direction that maybe the free agent thing is part of it. Like maybe it had something to do with his hiring. So I do want to like have the option there. I do want to kind of say that like maybe there's a little bit of something to the idea that Tocchet could be a guy who could maybe bring some people in. Let me see. I'm actually going to bring up the Briere quote here on the screen. So hopefully you guys are going to be able to read this. I did fix the issue that prevented me from doing this on Tuesday. So we have this now. So here's Danny Briere, his comment on the hiring of Rick Tocchet as head coach. Danny says, I am very happy to welcome Rick Tocchet as our head coach. During this process, it became clear that Rick was the absolute right coach to lead our team. He has enjoyed the highest level of success, both as a player and coach. Rick's ability to teach and understand his players, combined with his passion for winning, brings out the best in young players at different stages of their development and has earned the respect and confidence of highly talented all-stars and veteran players alike. So there you have the idea of development. You have the idea of young players appreciating and liking him, and veterans and all-stars liking him. That to me reads like, we believe that Rick Tocchet is going to help us acquire players, make Philadelphia a destination again. Will it happen? Remains to be seen. Will it happen? You have to kind of hope so. And if he doesn't help you recruit free agents, if this hire doesn't ultimately get you elite talent, well, then I don't know. I don't know what that means. Dan Hilferty had the following to say as well. He said, from the first conversation I had with Rick, it struck me how deeply he cares about the Philadelphia Flyers, our city, and the fans. Rick's track record speaks for itself. He has not only been successful at different stages of his career, but he has a way of connecting with his players and staff. I strongly believe he is the ideal person to unite and lead us toward our ultimate goal of building this team into a perennial contender again. Keith Jones said, we are thrilled to have Rick lead our team into the future. What is impressive about Rick is that players gravitate towards him and develop a strong relationship in the process. There is a genuine trust that he will do everything he can to bring success to the team. So you take Hilferty saying he deeply cares about the organization, the team, the city. You take Danny's comments and Jonesy's comments, really implying that players love playing for this guy, that they forge a bond. There you go. Like, that to me is the vision. He's going to come in here and he's going to be able to bring players along with him. But we have to find out. The Quinn Hughes quote is great. But again, a lot of questions around the JT Miller and Elias Pettersson.